only make sense this way.
Yes, I mean, the guy couldn't handle my confrontation, so it wasn't in his face. All I wanted to do was discuss with me how electromagnetic energy interacts with matter, because he doesn't have clue one as to how it interacts. And
well, I don't have the indoctrination that you have, George, and I don't have the math indoctrination that you study, teach about. But as far as RF energy bouncing off of a hard surface, I can actually use my own common sense and come to a better. Okay, put up some diagrams here. And as a general rule of thumb, lower frequency wavelengths will reflect better off of smooth hard surfaces. Higher frequency wavelengths get absorbed or actually transmit through. That's what we have with the ionosphere. That's why lower frequency wavelengths are off. The skywave, low RAN signals bounce off glass firmament at the top of the sky at high. These diagrams here to help you understand what's really going on as far as like the skywave bounce. Why it makes much more sense. Right, it makes much more sense that we're living inside a concave sphere, and there's actually a glass and ice firmament at the top of the sky, because it's a smooth surface. It's also a convex surface on top of the sky, so it's actually going to reflect a great distance, and it's going to be a specular reflection, coherent, as opposed to incoherent. So they're not going to get much signal loss when it's a smooth, hard surface. I can come back down to whether it's land or ocean. So that's going to be more of an irregular surface. Is the ocean, the waves, or ground, and so it's going to bounce back with a shorter distance of reflection, and it's also going to be diffuse, coherent, scattering. It's going to come back again, and it's going to hit the glass again, which is again a convex smooth surface, and it's going to generate a greater distance as well. So that's how we get the skip pattern going across to the other side of the Earth, inside the Earth. And obviously it's going to look better at nighttime when the sunlight is not interfering with the RF frequency. So if you were on a convex ball and there was no hard surface to the atmosphere, it would just be a plasmic, undefined area of electrons. You wouldn't have that surface, that smooth surface, to bounce coherent, specular waves. It would be incoherent. It would scatter. This is also why, like, here, pull this one. Plasma stealth. Plasma stealth. You know what that is, George? Get a better screenshot of that. Plasma stealth. Technology is what can be called active stealth technology in scientific terms. This technology was first developed by the Russians. It's a milestone in the field of stealth technology. Technology behind this, not at all new. Plasma stealth, the aircraft injects a stream of plasma in front of the aircraft. Plasma will cover the entire body of the fighter and will absorb most of the electromagnetic energy of the radar waves, thus making the aircraft difficult to detect. So if you don't have a hard surface to the ionosphere, it's just a field of plasma, those RF frequency, those RF waves are going to just be absorbed. And that's what we have in your model. It doesn't make sense. You need a hard surface. This is your false convex Earth model. If you didn't have a hard surface to the ionosphere, for one thing, it would be, you'd have this undefined concave surface to the sky, so there'd be a shorter distance of reflection. It would be more diffuse and incoherent. It would be more scatter coming back down to the ground. You'd also have an irregular convex surface on a convex Earth. Theoretically, it would bounce a little bit farther than a concave surface, but there would still be more scattering. So the signal would be canceled out. It would soon be absorbed. There's no way you'd be able to reflect the radio signal all the way around the convex Earth without a hard surface to the sky, a hard, smooth surface to the sky. So that's what you fail to realize, heliocentrists. It's just indoctrination. And see, what they have to tell you is that there's different levels to the ionosphere. There's the E layer, the sporadic E layer, the F layer, the D layer, the F1, F2. And that's not the case. There's only one layer at 100 kilometers. Actually, there's higher glasses way up toward the center of the Earth over here. But as far as the RF waves and the ionosphere are concerned, it's really just hitting one hard surface. It's a glass ice firmament, and that's where the micrometeors are coming from. That's where the tektites are coming from. That's why meteorites are covered with fusion crust. Fusion crust is burnt glass. And so with these different frequencies of RF signal, this is a little graph they will show you. This is the E layer. They call it the sporadic E layer. It's at 100 kilometers. Remember I talked about where Sigrid, I forget her last name. She's an astrophysicist. I think she works for NASA. But she compared the sporadic meteoroids hitting the sporadic E layer at 100 kilometers like bugs off of a windshield. She's indicating to you that it's a hard surface. And so we have this E layer that they will call it, and then they say there's an F layer, F2 layer, or F3 layer, whatever they want to say. Those are simply hitting the glass sky at higher frequencies, and so they're either being absorbed more or they're actually transmitting through. The higher the frequency, the greater the transmission through a hard surface. So that's what's happening. This is why these lower frequencies are going to reflect back. You're not going to get much signal attenuation when it comes back. But these higher frequencies, they're going to either transmit through the glass or they're going to be absorbed into the glass. And there's not going to be as much of a return signal, if any. So it's very simple to understand this, ladies and gentlemen. It does not work. Reflection of radio waves off the ionosphere will not work unless there is a hard surface, period. This is what Wiki will tell you. Ionograms show the virtual heights and critical frequencies of the ionospheric layers, which are measured by an ionosonde. Ionosonde sweeps a range of frequencies, usually from 0.1 to 30 megahertz, transmitting at vertical incidence to the ionosphere. As the frequency increases, each wave is refracted less by the ionization in the layer, and so each penetrates further before it is reflected. Eventually, a frequency is reached that enables the wave to penetrate the layer without it being reflected. Total transmission. Higher, extremely high frequencies will just transmit right through the glass. But instead of, they're under the faulty presupposition that there is no hard surface to the atmosphere. Therefore, they have to give you different layers of it. And that's dependent upon the frequency. See, the lower frequency is going to reflect, but this is a false convex Earth model. So that's what they're failing to tell you. It's just a faulty presupposition. Here's another graph. The level of absorbance is greater than the frequency when the wavelength is shorter. In other words, when it's higher frequency, it's going to be higher absorbent. I mentioned this graph before. This is a ham radio wave, a horizontal ham radio antenna wave, where the energy is always going to be rising upward. You have these different lobes, but it's never going straight across and it's never going downward. Radio frequency, radio energy is always rising up. I made this graph before. A skip wave has a hard, smooth surface. It's a specular reflection as opposed to a diffuse reflection. It only works because there's a hard surface to the ionosphere. There was a man named Robert Watson Watt, who was a Scottish pioneer of radar technology. He was actually, I think it was World War II. Yeah, World War II, where they were concerned about the Germans attacking England, and he had to hurry up and develop some kind of technology where he could pick up the incoming radar of the German airplanes. And so in this movie here, it's called Castles in the Sky. They give you some innuendos that there's actually a glass surface to the ionosphere. I'm just going to play part of that here. Can't play the music. Copyright strike video. Hard surface, ping pong ball against a hard surface. Then you comes to realization that he can bounce a signal off of a hard surface in the sky, the ionosphere. Glass. Electrons will ionize. When UV light hits glass. That's why they call it an ionosphere. And there are definitely not multiple layers of this plasma field. It's definitely a hard surface layer. So many indications. I don't have to reiterate them. You can just watch them. I'll put some links in the description box. But that's what's going on. So going back to George here, George, you just simply need to look at the evidence and use common sense and realize that you're in an indoctrination system of heliocentric cultism. It's not true. And as far as my personal character is concerned, I would actually question yours. You don't have any tact. You don't have any sensitivity. Barbie was in a state of distress. She needed comfort. But you just wanted to come on and push your agenda. So that's where I see you obviously have some character flaws. And yeah, I blew up at you. I believe it was deservedly so, because it was inappropriate for you to come on. You even claimed here that you don't initiate things unless you're like asked to, but obviously right there too as well. So that's why we have a hard surface to the sky, to the atmosphere. There's glass and there's ice attached to the glass, and you're living inside the concave sphere of the Earth. At you through the glass, know how much time has passed. God, it feels like forever. No one ever tells you that forever feels like home. Being all alone inside your head. Fair use.
One of the great things that happens during a total solar eclipse is that the sky goes dark and the stars come out. In 1915, Albert Einstein predicted that objects that had strong gravity like the sun would bend. And Sir Albert Eddington in 1919 decided to test Einstein's prediction by photographing the stars near the sun during a total solar eclipse. He also photographed them 6 months before the total solar eclipse, when the sun was nowhere near those stars. He then compared the images, and he discovered that just as Einstein had predicted, starlight bent the gravity of the sun. But he needed a total solar eclipse to do that experiment. Well, we can't bend light measurably on Earth, but I can show you how to use the bottom of a wine glass to bend light using refraction, and very much the same pattern that gravity bends light around the sun and around the house. I've set up a blue light emitting diode behind me. You can see the wave of light. See that sun doesn't have enough gravity to do this, but a black hole does. And I get exact alignment. The distant star becomes a ring about the quite dramatic. It's probably a good thing that our sun is not a black hole.
Well, that was very interesting. Let me explain to you guys what's really going on. Now, I said in the previous video that why would I even try to convince you otherwise? It was intended, the deception, but you know me. I guess there's a time to deceive and there's a time to reveal and make the ass clown scientards become fools. So let me do that. Show you what I did here. Playing around with the solar eclipse. Screen here. Screen. Go. There. Okay. What we're looking at, obviously, is a moon in front of the sun with background stars. If I go to my top view here, oops, top view, go to wireframe mode. I'm going to show you what's going on. Concave Earth, glass skies. You'll notice this yellow glass sphere is surrounding the celestial sphere, the inner sphere there, and then we have the moon sphere, and then we have this the largest of the glass spheres, and they're all have indexes of refraction. At least one has a negative index of refraction. And you'll see this yellow glass sphere. Now imagine if my camera was, it is actually, it's down at the bottom. Camera's down there at the bottom, okay. And I got a little sun. It's right here. There's my sun. It's behind the sun glass sphere, and then the moon is right in front of it, or right below it. There's the moon, okay? So the camera's pointing straight at the sun-moon alignment. And what is going on? I was doing a little bit of fiddling around with eclipses in 3D, and what is happening is that because the sun is, obviously it's hot, it's going to generate heat, and it's going to create thermal expansion of the glass sphere that it's behind. And so it's going to create a bulging. So let's get that bulging. Right now I have the bulge on the opposite side. You see at the top there's a little bulge. So if I turn that around, rotate it, so it's directly in front of the sun. Now it's direct, the bulge is right in front of the sun over here. And now we can look through with our camera with the refraction turned on. The refraction, now it's off, now it's on. So we're always looking at the sun and the moon through glass with refraction. That bulge is actually going to displace the background stars, and that's exactly what they observed, Eddington and Einstein, is that the background stars were displaced as if looking through a glass. Wine glass, yeah, that's the ticket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate that glass sphere so it's behind again, so we're not looking through the bulge, and you see the difference. I'm going to just toggle 180 degrees, that, and I'll go back to 0. You see the displacement of the stars? That's all that's happening. Thermal expansion is happening because the sun is so hot. Obviously, if you've ever studied helioseismology, the study of the sun, they will say that the corona of the sun is like exponentially hotter than the photosphere. This photosphere would be the surface of the sun. And so, understand what really is going on here. It's the corona that is actually exhibiting most of the heat. Most of the heat is actually going sideways. So it's splaying out like that. So that's why this glass sphere is not going to melt, because most of the heat is going sideways. If you ever look at solar eclipse, you see the solar corona. Type one in real quick. And you notice how the corona, like this image right here, it shows how the corona is splaying out sideways for the most part. So most of the heat is actually going out sideways like that. But there is still heat in front of it as well. And so that's what's going on here. Also, I was doing some research on the Libyan desert glass, and it exhibits what they call negative viscosity. And when pressure is applied, when heat is applied, the index of refraction changes as well. So it's going to displace the moon during an eclipse as well. And with the bending of the light, like I mentioned before in a previous video, the way in which the light of the sun hits the back of the moon is only a half of a sphere. Think of like a bowl. And it's paramagnetic, which means it has a very weak magnetic field, and it aligns with the magnetic field. And so this is a new moon over here. When, like the day after the new moon, the light from the sun is still gonna line up with the back of the moon. It's like the moon is like a concave catcher's mitt. It catches the light. Sung by Sufjan Stevens. The bowl is filled with light. So that's what's happening. The moon, and the way the light is interacting, the sunlight is interacting with the moon. It aligns up the light parallel, and it sucks it up when it's near the sun. But when it's further away, obviously it begins to deviate, and we begin to see the phases of the moon. But that has to do with the magnetism. If you ever watched that video where the guy is putting a magnet to a cathode ray tube, and the light beam or the electron beam from the CRT tube is bending, or it's being repelled by the magnet. Well, this is similar to that, but only the moon, being a paramagnetic material, is actually aligning itself with the magnetic field. So we have a few different variables at play here. We have the negative viscosity, which also increases the negative refraction of the glass. Bends the light. It's called relaxing of the Libyan desert glass. There's actually an article that NASA was a part of. Let's see if we can find that here. I think it's right over here. Relaxation of Libyan desert glass, evidence for negative viscosity, pressure dependence, and silica. And look and behold, it's in the Smithsonian Astrophysics, something or other associated with NASA. So yeah, they studied it. They know what's going on. They know that there's glass above, and it's creating real lensing. It's not gravitational lensing. So that's what's going on with that. Also, I wanted to touch a little bit on solar eclipses. Let's see if I can pull up a file here really quick. Let's see. Let's try this one here. Solar eclipses are going to happen where the shadow of the moon shadow, moving from west to east, that's going to happen. That only can happen if the sun and the moon are either extremely close to each other, like in my model, or extremely far away from each other, like the Heliotard's model, spinner model. And so, obviously, if you have any common sense, you realize that the sun is not 93 million miles away, and we can get the shadow moving from. Well, I can't do a full traversing of the shadow across the land because I'm limited with the software. I can't do bending light, but what I can do, let's see, Where's it going? Here it is. You see how the shadow right here? It's starting on the west side of Africa. If I scroll, it moves from west to east. And that's only possible if the sun and moon are very close to each other. So, top through here, you see how the sun is right here and the moon is right here. Actually, I got two moons there and two suns. One was I was doing a displaced sun and displaced moon, showing how the refraction actually causes it to move in front of the sun. Let's just, for clarity purposes, let's just eliminate the displaced one so we can see what's going on. To include that one. Let's go back to the sun here. And you also notice too, I put a bunch of lights around the sun. Zooming real close. And that was to create a penumbra. If I just have like one point of one light source, it's not going to create the penumbra. So I had to actually outline the diameter of the sun to create that feathered penumbral edge. So let's explain that. So, yeah, it's hilarious though. It's quite amusing to listen to these guys. So, yeah, we're getting a bulge of the glass that's in front of the sun. That's creating more of a refraction, so it's displacing the stars. That's what's happening. And Einstein got hailed as a hero for coming up with the wrong answer. What do I get hailed as? A moron? A fool? A crazy person? Anyway, just thought I'd reveal another groundbreaking secret to y'all. Have a good day.
The most amazing thing about nature, and that I discovered in my book, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism, is that everything is absolutely reducible to two principles: force and motion, and inertia and acceleration. Now, what props up 100% of the visible universe is magnetism. There are only two principles: force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Everything that gives volume to energy is magnetism. Magnetism reciprocates and expresses itself, as per my discovery, as a reciprocating precessional hyperboloid. Now, how do you express a reciprocating precessional hyperboloid, and what is it, and why does it extrapolate itself as a hypertrochoid? And of course, you asked the question, what is a hypertrochoid? A hypertrochoid, a lot of people tell them a spirograph pattern, and then they know what you're talking about as far as the pattern. Here's a real picture that I took under the ferrocell of a magnet. You can see the hypertrochoid, i.e. spirograph pattern of magnetic field reciprocation. What is space? Nothing other than denotatively, not connotatively, but the after effect of the loss of inertia as expressed by magnetism, which leaves the posterior attribute of space in its wake. Now, this is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional toroidal, where magnetism reciprocates from quote-unquote North Pole to quote-unquote South Pole, and inversely so. But it really is the case that magnetism, which Faraday called the dielectric field, the loss of inertia, which is extrapolating, expressing itself in a circle, is actually two-dimensional. So while we think of what props up the universe as three-dimensional, what gives volume to every atom in picometers is actually not magnetism, but the wake, the after effect of the loss of inertia, which is space, as Nikola Tesla and others have stated that space is neither a field. Well, this is actually my saying, but Tesla said the same thing, that space is neither a field nor a force. It can act on nothing. It does nothing of itself or of its own accord. So the two-dimensional expression of this toroidal hypertrochoid, which is a hyperboloid loss of inertia expressing force and motion, which reciprocates, which defines what magnetism is, which oddly enough the Ojibwe Indians actually have probably seen these before. These are they're little dream catchers that they created, which have hypertrochoid formations in the center of them, but it wasn't discovered until the invention of the ferrocell that that is a coherent magnetic reciprocation can only be expressed by a hypertrochoid. Now, nobody figured out why it does that or how it does that until I discovered and explained why this pattern is created by a magnet. I also found out that magnetism, the same way as in the golden angle, which is 137.5077 degrees, you can see the actual spirograph or hypotrochoid pattern. For example, in the sunflower, you can actually see that. You can compare the two side by side. You see the hypertrochoid pattern here and here. They're both identical. I don't know what sort of natural or noumenal principles the Ojibwe Indians were actually channeling to come up with this, but this formation, this hypertrochoidal formation, defines 100% of the visible universe. Now, this is irrefutable, but if I die tomorrow, if I have a heart attack or get hit by a car, of course, I'm still working on the 4th edition of my book, but the one thing I can actually die proud of is that I'm the first person in the world to give a full and accurate, detailed, total explanation of how magnetism works, why it works, and this is my discovery here as well, actually, how the very simplex mathematical formula for magnetic divergence and convergence. There still, however, is also, as I also discovered, a phase shift that I predicted that is part of electromagnetic retardation, which must define a spatial creation divergence, which must be expressed. And here's the electromagnetic retardation phase shift. This is a genuine picture of a hypertrochoidal magnet seen underneath the ferrocell, which expresses itself as 111 and 1 plus 1 over 5 to the power of -3, or basically 1.123606. Anyway, they're all expressions of phi, but this is the EM retardation, which occurs as a phase shift, which, as per the prior videos, also causes the phase shift of magnetodielectric retardation. There's either rarefaction or compression. There's rarefaction on the North Pole and compression on the South Pole. And here you can actually see from genuine light, this is LED light shot over the surface of a magnet, you can actually see that magnetodielectric retardation phase shift that, for example, now Dr. Olev D. Jefremenko didn't know or understand this, but he wrote an extensive book on EM retardation. But this is my discovery here. This is the actual formula for what defines the entire universe as far as the magnetic reciprocation. This is empirically valid, and here's the formula for it. I discovered it, and like I said, if I croak tomorrow from a heart attack or a car accident or something, I can at least say that I died having discovered one of the great mysteries of the universe and being the first person to do so. It just makes me so. This is a real picture too. You can actually see the books underneath the magnet that's being held there by the hand. This is looking at the ferrocell, and you can see the center here is the hypertrochoidal formation. Now, neither the inventor or the person that greatly studied it, they explicitly stated they didn't know why that formation existed, but I understood it perfectly. I mean, it's no different than what plumbers understand about why water runs downhill, for example. It is the expression of necessitated pressure mediation. by which the only force in motion principle of the universe, i.e. magnetism, i.e. the loss of inertia, or as Michael Faraday called it, the dielectric field, can express itself, and that can only be expressed. This discovery is of mine, copyright 10/2014, a reciprocating processional hyperboloid. I mean, light is being influenced vis-a-vis the Faraday effect by the magnetism that it is running over. And since light is a longitudinal dielectric pulse or ether perturbation with necessitated electrical and magnetic transverse elements, whether that's circularly polarized light or otherwise, doesn't matter. You still have transverse EM distinctions. That's the phase at which light can only be induced due to its transverse components, which we define as the speed of light. But this is magnetism as painted by the light that is shot over top of it. And it can only express itself that way, and it's a golden ratio expression. Here you can see the hypertrochoidal formation like in a sunflower. It exists in other places in nature, but you know, as of last year, you know, this is my discovery, my formula, and I knew that this must be the case, and it accurately describes why this is. It explains everything about magnetism. The phase shift of magnetism, as you can see here, I calculated this before I actually observed it. And once I observed it, then, you know, I validated it. I mean, I knew it could only exist that way. You know, Mother Nature, unlike the premise of quantum mechanics and general relativity, is not an insane crack whore, you know, with virtual photons, muons, blue. You know, they've defined the whole universe as the principle of these unicorn and fairy dust particles rolling around and bumping into each other like a giant rain stick. And, you know, Mother Nature, i.e. nature, does not work that way. Everything is absolutely irreducible to two principles, force and motion and inertia and acceleration. Gravity itself is not an autonomous force or principle, it is merely dielectric acceleration. There's no force applied in letting go of a ball at a certain height and letting it accelerate towards the dielectric center where force, everything over here is increasing force and motion. Everything in this direction is decreasing force and motion, i.e. increasing acceleration. Of course, we think wrongly that increasing acceleration is like throwing your foot on the pedal of your car and increasing speed, but that's actually expenditure of force and motion by burning gasoline. So that's not actual acceleration. That's the expenditure of chemical force. So humans have a really wrong deep connotation in their minds of acceleration. That's all we think of when we think in terms of acceleration. But true field theory acceleration is something wholly different. That is something that does not involve force and motion, rather the erasure of force and motion. Right now we're expressing force and motion, which must necessarily, as field reciprocations, mediate themselves, return to inertia and acceleration. And this pattern that you can see here that I'm creating with a very simplex application. This is basically a child's program, you know, that I'm creating this on. But this two-dimensional representation of force and motion, which creates this hypertrochoidal formation, or what most people would call, oh, it's the spirograph pattern. You know, it's the necessitated field pressure mediation of how magnetism can and must express itself. And here's the empirical, you know, observational criteria for obviously what it is. I mean, these are real pictures. They're real pictures of magnetism, but nobody understood why they were that way or how they were that way until I fully explained it. And not only have I fully explained it, I mean, I've got like 350 some more pages to add to the book, but this is the mathematical formula for the entire principle of force and motion in the universe, how and why it extrapolates itself, and the magnitudes by which it does extrapolate. I mean, it's just divinely simple. I mean, it's so simplex. It's not simple, but it is simplex. It's the only way that nature can express itself through the loss of inertia. Like I said, you got to remember that this is an irreducible fact, that 100% of the visible universe is propped up by magnetism, not dielectricity. not electrostatics, not electricity. Electricity is a hybrid, by the way. Electricity is phi times psi. It's dielectricity times magnetism, which equals Q in Planck, i.e. electrification. So there is no such principle as gravity. Gravity is nothing other than the erasure of force and motion. As Tesla said, of course, space itself has no properties. We're talking about the erasure of force and motion, which is expressed as increasing mutual acceleration of masses, and those masses are defined as quasi-stable force and motion inertia acceleration bubbles, which of course have a nucleus, which are constantly expressing themselves. Even the idiots of quantum mechanics and general relativity and all branches of science will state that, well, 99.999999% of an atom is empty space, but that's not true. What is here, if this is the model of an atom, which it is, if it were a coherent atom, this is how it expresses itself. It's a two-dimensional toroid, which is expressed as a three-dimensional toroidal force and motion reciprocation. Now, you're only seeing two-dimensional reciprocation vis-a-vis my drawing here, but what you can see, what you can't see, is the fact that it is expressing, extrapolating itself as a reciprocating precessional hyperboloid, which navigates out this hypertrochoidal formation. That is the only way that force and motion can express itself. Now, while this is a 2D drawing, you actually can see the three-dimensionality of the toroidal shape, which defines this. But the interatomic volume of an atom is not empty. It is a sheer magnetodielectricity. That is the air of the balloon that props up each and every atom, and therefore magnetism is that which connotatively and denotatively is 100% of the visible universe. Now, light, of course, itself has volume, but is a longitudinal expression of dielectric interference, is a pulse modulation with necessitated transverse electrical and magnetic components, the phase shift and frequency of light. And most photographers obviously couldn't give a crap about this, but it's fascinating for those that, like some of us, are kind of interested in knowing the basis and principles of the entire mechanics of the universe. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope it didn't bore you to tears, and catch you later.
And lo and behold, I did it. I actually did it. I created the half-lit polarized sun, the mystery that has just been showing up. There it is, guys. I'm just moving my perspective view around. Nothing is changing. I just moved it like that. So mystery is totally solved. Zoom back out a little bit here. As you can see, I have my two polarizers that are perpendicular, and let's see if I can pull it back here. Yeah, there's my Earth. I actually moved I moved it up higher. Oops. The polarizers and the illumination, where they, normally it's going to be higher. What I was showing earlier, there was just my initial attempt at it, but I had to move it up higher like that. And lo and behold, when I moved it up higher like that, it created the bifurcation of the sunlight, the polarized sunlight like that. So here's looking through the camera. Wait a minute, let me. This is here. This is it. There. So there's a perspective view, and it's upside down. Way at the bottom there, that's where the camera is. Back out, you see the polarized glass above. So we have the yellow would be the glass covering the moon, and the gray above that would be the glass covering the sun. This was brought to my attention in the group. Apparently, this has been happening. This phenomenon has been happening in many different places, where we actually will see a termination line of the sun. Usually when, I think it's always when the sun is at the horizon, appears to be at the horizon anyway.
you get that cutoff. And I'll show a little bit more in this guy's video. He talks about it. I want to thank him for bringing this to my attention. Well, there's a fake convex Earth. Let's see what else I can find there. Hello. Different illumination happening in it. Really, there's no other option, guys. You really need to understand that there is no other option but the fact that there is glass above and it's polarized glass. Okay? And there's bending light, obviously. You need to understand as well. He also talks about this little streak of light that goes across the sky. Here, somebody reported or showed him. And he mentioned how you can actually hear the actual, it is a meteor, by the way, it's scraping against the top side of the glass. And he says it sounds like pushing a snowplow across a hard surface. Listen.
It's an actual phenomenon of it's not the TM.1. I'll share that with you in just a minute. I don't know. I'll let you guys decide. But I will tell you what he said it sounded like. It also came with sound. He said it reminded him of a snowplow pushing snow on a concrete pavement. That's what this thing sounded like when it went over.
Okay, well, that coincides perfectly with my previous video where I talked about how there's actually a variance in velocity of the light and sound. Sound is not a constant, neither is light. And you can watch my slow light video to understand how superconductivity and negative refraction and all these different variables will actually slow down the light way up high to a crawl. And it also will speed up sound at different locations as well. I would think that it would be very, very fast up in the center, just like sound going through water. I'm not really. It has to do with the fact that it's not being compressed and rarefacted again. It's just like this big medium where it's just like moving in unison together like that. And so there's something like that happening up above at about 100 kilometers as well, where sound is incredibly fast. Plus, sound has a head start, right? If you have a meteor rumbling across a hard surface at a really, really fast velocity, it's going to take a while for that to glow. You know, the triboluminescence glow that I talked about. It's going to take a while for that to happen. And so you're going to hear it first, and then you're going to see it. And so by the time it reaches our eye, it's pretty much it appears to be anyway, pretty much at the same time. I also want to talk a little bit, well, let's go back to the polarization, where I actually replicated something in 3D similar. It's not quite exactly that, but it will help you understand that there is glass and there's polarization happening. Let's pull that one up here. Yeah, this one. Okay, so if I go into my modeler program, you will see, if I go to the front view of it, you see it's kind of like a pyramid triangular shape where the illumination, there's a light above that polarizer. And I actually duplicated that polarizer so that it would be two polarizers horizontal, or not horizontal, perpendicular to each other. And so you're getting this effect here where the illumination is happening above the polarizers. It's like an X there. And it's going through, and I have a camera below it. So the camera's, you see the concavity of the Earth, the green area, and it's looking up above it. And so when we look through those two polarizers like that, those perpendicular polarizers like that, and I zoom in a little bit, you'll notice you see a tiny little illumination zone in the middle there. And I'm just, really what I'm doing is I'm just holding down my Alt button and I'm just moving our viewpoint around. I'm not moving any of the 3D objects. I'm not rotating the camera. I'm just moving that thing around. And you'll notice too, if I zoom out like that a little bit, you see the X on the outside, the illumination of that. That's replicating how we view sundogs in the 22nd degree halos and the 46 degree halos. It's exactly what we view. And so even if you zoom in really close to that little illumination beam, we get a diamond, just like we see with sundogs. It's the same effect. This is the only way it's happening.
there are glass polarizers in the sky that are perpendicular to each other that are creating that. God, do you realize how monumental this is? This is explaining it all, and you got to be honest with yourself. You got to realize if you're rejecting me only because I present to you the true shape of the earth, but I happen to include the claim that I'm Christ, then you really have a problem with your understanding of logical deducing things. There's a problem there. You're siding with error of stupidity, like I talked about before. And you really need to face the facts. I am Christ. This is my earth. This is why I can explain things like this. This is why I have hid these things, and I'm starting to really reveal them toward the end. You see the X there? You understand? Like if I go to, let's just go show you a picture of a sunduck. Let's find one. Goes some up here. Look at that. It's the same freaking thing, guys. It's the same freaking thing. See, we have the illumination of those X's on the outer side or outer circumference of the actual circle, and then the reason why that's dark in the middle like that is because there's polarization happening. Okay, understand? So let's go back here to 3D and zoom back out a little bit. And let me do this. I'm going to try to because I got the double polarization happening at the same level like that. And probably what's happening, we have the 100-kilometer glass sky, and we have the glass sky covering the moon, higher, much higher, and the glass sky covering the sun and planets, higher than that. And so it's very possible that that double perpendicular polarization is happening between the moon glass sphere and the planet sun glass sphere. So it could be much higher, and obviously the light would be higher than that. I can bring that up as well. Let's see what I can do there. Light. Here, let's bring that up. Oops, I'm rotating it. Don't rotate it, Steve. Move it. Okay, let's bring it up like that. So the light is much higher, and those polarization effects that are happening are probably the sun, planets, glass sphere, and the moon glass sphere. But let's get my light to do what I want it to do by decreasing the actual spotlight cone angle. Normally it's going to be, you're going to get like more than half, but I'm just decreasing it to show you for this example, just to fit through polarizers like that. And so look, wow, it's amazing. Let's increase the intensity of the light to 250%. Does that do anything? No. See, the polarization is happening because, well, I should say the illumination is happening because there's like a gap as that polarization of the light goes through like that. Like I said before, I'm just moving my viewpoint. I'm not changing the rotation angles or the position of the camera or whatever. And let's move one of those polarizers a little bit higher than the other one. Can. Second here. Let's way down there now. Let's try another way. Let's do this one. Let's say it's over here. This one would be the sun planet glass sphere, maybe. This is theoretical, but this is the reason why it's happening. The bottom one could be the moon glass sphere. And let's go to our camera view and see what's happening there. Yeah, we still get the polarization, and we still get the Xing happening. That's what's happening. But there must be some kind of polarization dividing effect happening that I'm revealing to you guys in these last days, where it's making it a clear-cut case for one answer, one explanation to this so-called mystery. Okay. And in a later video, maybe in the near future, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Bell's theorem with the polarization and the mist. It's a so-called mystery why if you shoot light through one polarizer and then it goes through another that's cocked at 45 degrees, it'll receive about 50% of that light. But if you put that same light, if you add another polarizer in between those two polarizers at 22.5 degrees, you're going to receive more light.
it's going to be like 70%. So there's a mystery, like why do we get more light with more polarizers? Well, it's simple, guys. It's like taking a Grand Prix race car and going really, really fast around a sharp turn. You're going to crash into the wall. That's what's happening with the light too. If it's too sharp of a turn, you're going to lose 50% or more of the light. But if it's a nice gradual turn, you're not going to lose as much light. And that's what's happening. And I can also go into detail later. I'm just going to give you a little hint of what I'm thinking about. And maybe you guys can think about this too. Is that, electromagnetism? They will show you. They'll give you a. Let's see if I can find a picture of one. They'll give you a picture of the. Wave, I guess, electromagnetic wave. Yeah. They'll give you a picture of a perpendicular little doohickey where, if I can supposed to. There, this one. How do you know that the electric field, the red, versus the magnetic field, the blue, is the same height? How do you know that? I mean, you don't. And so and that's another reason, possibility why that's happening like that, is because as this light makes a sharp turn like that, it's going to block, some of the light's not going to go through. But if it makes a nice gradual turn like that, it can go through. But anyway, that's another video. So that's what's happening with the mystery, so-called mystery of this. Watch my previous video. I talked about the so-called mystery of these tiny little water droplets on glass, and when you're looking through them, you see, you think, oh yeah, that's why these people are thinking there's like a so-called quote sun simulator end quote that NASA even built, right?
Detailing all the proceedings of the rectilinear experiment. The location of the Koreshan geodetic survey was over a straight patch of sand in Naples Beach, Florida, and it's from the Koreshan County. The rectilineator experiment, invented by Morrow, was a geniusly simple apparatus consisting of giant 12-foot sectioned T-squares lining up together in a leapfrog procession over a long distance to form a perfectly straight air line. If done accurately, it would determine the direction of the curvature of the Earth, if any. In other words, if the initially leveled airline would continually rise the further down it went, the Earth would prove to be convex, just like the Copernican system proclaims. If the line continued at the same height, the Earth would be proven to be flat. And if the airline would show a continual descent from the initial station, the Earth would be proven to be concave. This test of the curvature of the Earth subverts any attempts by long-distance lasers or telescopic surveys. Although these other tests are good methods to determine Earth is not convex, the rectilineator has the advantage of forcing the line by a mechanical process to stay rigid throughout the survey. It doesn't allow the varying bending of light, which has been proven to fluctuate throughout the day. Because of Florida's ever-rising water levels over the past 118 years since the survey, and because Naples Beach is a luxurious haven for the wealthy, manicured beaches today look slightly different than from the line illustrations that the Koreshans provided. The survey started at the still-standing Naples Pier and extended southward for 4 1/8 of a mile. 2 3/8 of those miles were measured with the rectilineator apparatus, and the remaining 1 3/4 of a mile were surveyed by line-of-sight telescope. There's a break in the beach called Gordon Pass, and directly behind the pass is a sandbar that needed to be excavated or scooped out in order for the descending airline to pass through the sandbar and shoot the water at 4 1/8 of a mile, where a sailboat was cast off to be used as a reference point of the termination of the projected airline to the water. Preparations before the survey could actually begin were tedious and time-consuming. Full 2 months of the complete 5-month-long project involved one. Conducting an initial coast survey with surveyor's instruments, which involved erecting a series of stakes on the beach spaced at 1/8 of a mile apart, creating a 4 1/2 mile long meridian line extending north to south. These stakes were to be used as reference points for the rectilineator, but also set the locations for the caissons, which I'll get into soon. 2, mild land excavation is necessary. The shoreline's elevation varies from about 5 feet at the beginning. Detailing up.
In this video, I'm going to easily visually display to you what is going on with the octahedron and the way in which we see the celestial sphere. Remember, I mentioned before that the octahedron acts as a resonant absorptive antenna. If you look at radiation patterns of dipole antennas, it has the same dipole effect, where it is splitting the circle in two, and we see the same type of pattern there with our eyes. Our eyes, wherever we are within the inside of the Earth, whatever latitude we're at. In this case, we're at 45 degrees north. Our eyes are always going to carry it to the center, and it will figuratively split the celestial sphere into two. And so the half that is facing you flips in curvature, and it appears as if that side creates a dome over your head. It's not a real dome, it's a virtual dome. But that is the way that light operates, that energy operates, that electricity operates within the Earth. That resonant absorptive energy that sucks the light up toward the center will always intersect the celestial sphere perpendicularly. That is what creates the sun and the moon inversion. We think the sun is straight across, however, it is curled upward and inverted. Light is always bending up toward the center, wherever you are within the Earth. Horizontal dipole radio energy will always bend upward from the ground. This is the illusion that the secret of the universe holds.
3, 2, 1, drop.
The lift force and the sink force of the electromagnetic flux. There's an inversely proportional relationship between the two. Blue arrows represent the centripetal convergent lift force. It draws objects to the center, where the current is attracted to the moving convex surface of the celestial sphere. The lift force is stronger in the center and weaker at the edge. That is why planets had such an easy time staying aloft toward the center, because there's not that much sink force and plenty of lift force. If it weren't for the magnetic sun attracting the planets, they probably would crash into the celestial sphere. The lift force cohabitates with the centrifugal sink force, which has the inverse proportion effect. The sink force is the either push force we all experience on the Earth or in the Earth. As it moves, the divergent fluxes put the brakes on the Earth, preventing any rotation. Remember Wheeler's gyroscope on his huge neodymium iron-borne magnet? The centripetal lift force perpetuated the magnet in a viscous free flux near the center. Yet the centrifugal divergent sink force stopped the gyro on the edge. That's what's happening with the Earth. The sink force generates a depression to the west. That's why the bullets sink to the west and rise to the east, because there's a greater clamping down effect for projectiles shot into the downstream of the sink force. This is also what causes eastward deflection of flying objects. They seek the least resistance, which will always be found eastward of the meridian. The sink force is so strong at the edge it holds the water at bay. The ether's sink force eliminates the Coriolis or the Aptos effect from being the cause of this phenomenon.
It is almost like these electrons are running into a glass wall in space, said Professor Daniel Baker, Director of CU Boulder's Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics.
There is reason, or good reason to believe that it works within a concave Earth. Actually, it's the only model that correctly describes a lunar eclipse because of the Gegenschein.
And the software that calculates the position of the drone doesn't take into account that the RF waves are bending up.
The very instrument that heliocentrists will use to tell you that the Earth is rotating has actually turned to damning evidence that it is not rotating.
And tell me a little bit about cellular Earth.
I showed this concept on a previous video, like if you zoom in on a camera.
And Thunderbirds are go!
Apparent detection via new telescopes with concave lenses of otherwise invisible terrestrial entities, ITE. It was published by the Thunder Energies Corporation, Florida, USA. Ruggero Maria Santilli is the man behind this. And
so what we think is a straight line is actually curving. It's like our eye is traveling up a curve. If you center a camera on an object, and then you just merely zoom in, what you find out is the center object you were centered on is no longer in the center. And the reason why is because of bending light. Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. The Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. The Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. It changes position. It's the same with a ship that appears to be going over the horizon. It's not actually going over the horizon. With your naked eye, it appears as if a ship is going over a horizon. However, if you get your camera out and you zoom in on the ship's hull is still there and you can see the whole ship.
I have one video entitled "Flat Water Doesn't Exist," and it's really true. I mean, if you look at a sphere,
It's an optical illusion, is what I'm trying to get at. So the more powerful the telescope, and if air's conditions are right, if visibility conditions are right, you could see extremely far, and you could see land actually going up.
What I'm showing you in this video is the flight plan that we actually used for flying back from Rio to Sydney, Australia. This is some information on the estimated time of departure from Cape Town. These are the weather charts, and you'll see that's the Rio to Cape Town leg. There's the weather chart, infrared satellite weather. And you'll see the wind patterns. These little lines demonstrate the wind direction and strength.
oh man, that is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool, man. Wow.
It's brilliant.
So we had very, very good tailwinds right across there. It was just a nice, quick flight.
For the flat earthers.
Yes. So that means the guy was standing in the center of the area he was surveying. So if the guy is off to the side at a higher elevation, it's going to cause a different type of warping of the terrain. You know what I mean?
The evidence that we've seen doesn't suggest that what we've been told is true.
Flat earthers are trying to use concave water to prove flat earth.
Stake 1 has the laser 30 centimeters above the water. Stake 2, he has the laser centered on that stake at 30 centimeters above the water. Then they sailed to the center between the two stakes, and they were going to measure how high the laser was above the water.
Well, I personally have been to Lake Balaton with FE Core, and we've actually done a laser test from one end of the lake to the, well, didn't do the full lake because it's massive, but we did a 12-kilometer test, And we could actually see the laser from one end to the other. And since then, the guys actually produced a 40-kilometer laser test.
Okay, so my friend sailed back to my position. Together, we made a measurement in the middle of the distance between the two stakes. The measurement showed that the distance from the water surface to the beam was 39 to 40 centimeters. We decided to check if everything was okay with the laser and the stakes. Everything was still perfectly fine. We made another measurement in the middle, and it showed the same thing as previously. The beam was about 40 centimeters above the water surface. So in other words, on both ends, the laser was 30 centimeters above the surface of the water on both shorelines. However, in the center, the laser was 40 centimeters above the water surface, which would indicate the water actually curved like this. So it actually showed that the lake had some sort of concavity to it.
So this guy with a laser debunks all the pictures?
No.
The lake had some sort of concavity to it of 10 centimeters in the center.
The only logical place to start is to show you how nature created its very first pattern.
Who have laid the foundations of the earth? Right there in the middle.
The first thing that God does is create the 3 dimensions. It does this by projecting a beam of consciousness from a single point in all 6 directions: front, back, left, right, up, and down. You may need to pause or replay this video several times before the implications become apparent to you. To find some boundaries, all God needs to do is connect the end of every point to the end of every other point. Once all the ends are connected, what we have is an octahedron, which if viewed from the correct perspective reveals a hexagram, also known as the Star of David.
The sun is the negative power supply to the octahedron, and the power supply proves it's vibrating. It's like the sun spins around the celestial sphere and it sucks up electrons off the negative Earth. And light occurs from the electrons being funneled up and converging into the sun. That's where the sun's light comes from, like a light bulb kind of. Light emits when the electrons go through the filament.
I know of exactly one thing that supports the concave Earth model, and that is the Tamarack Mines anomaly.
The form of experiment were pointing to law being the truth, and they wouldn't be suppressed.
I read something like a 30-page technical paper.
It's been repeated both talks about the talk. If you look right into the form of experiment, no alternative to the result. Like no flat earth is saying with the form of it, it would do parallel, or more than saying it converge. What you have got is just non-concave pulling apart the result of divergence. Like saying that it was gravitational effect of the sides of the like iron shaft coming and stuff.
The bottom of the 2 plume bobs, the distance is greater. It's exaggerated here, but it was essentially 8.22 inches greater at the bottom than it was at the top. And this was 4,250 feet apart, basically. And so what that is saying is that if you projected where these 2 bobs would essentially connect, you're talking 4,000 miles.
Inverted hollow
Earth, okay? This is the continental, the granite plate. This is the basalt, the oceanic plate. Beneath that is the moho, the mantle. That's made out of metal. And then there's another layer of water.
Explain what it is we're going to see. Well, this is a piece of nitinol which was made in the shape of a cross spring. And the property of nitinol is that it when it's hot, it wants to get back to the shape it was when it was made. When it's cold, it's quite relaxed. This is now cold, and you see I can take it, stretch it out. It's made in the shape. It was made in the shape that I showed you first. Now cold, I can stretch it. Here I have a glass of hot water. If I just pour the hot water now, there we are. Good as new. In the cool state, it's relaxed and floppy. In the heated state, it remembers its former state. That's why I can say it has a memory. So if you make the thing, you make this piece of wire so it's straight. You made it. Then when it's hot, it wants to straighten out. When it's cold, just as floppy as a wet noodle. You take one of these things and put hot, cold water through in your hand. It's like a wet noodle when it's cold. When it's hot, it straightens out very suddenly. It's quite strong stuff.
In a small workshop across from his office, he designed and built a wheel with nitinol loops hanging from the spokes. He calculated that if he filled a container with cold water and another with hot water, the loops of nitinol, moving from one bath to the other, would bend, then spring back, and that the sudden spring of the nitinol in the hot water would drive the wheel around, thus becoming the world's first solid-state heat engine. He was right.
David Porter of Galtech Semiconductors demonstrates his recently patented permanent magnet motor called the carousel electric generator.
This is the latest version of the carousel motor generator. It's a rotary version. Rotary inside. There's 18 separate sections, what we call a coil section in here. 18 make up the outer diameter. There's 6 coils here that we're using to drive the motor. And we don't have an automatic start on the system right now. That's something that the Intel chip will do. We'll start it up at a pulse rate of approximately 13 pulses, which gives us a 16% duty cycle. It takes a while to spool up because, like I say, it works also as its own flywheel. So we build up the power gradually. The thing about this system is that everything floats on the magnetic field in there. You have very little internal friction. What we're doing is removing the energy from the magnet. The magnet has a specific life. They lose approximately 1% a year. So we're not actually trying to create energy from nothing. The system will not run forever. It's not perpetual motion. We use the amount of energy that is in the magnets. Once that energy is used up, the magnets can be taken out, they can be recharged. All we're doing is maximizing the efficiency of the electromagnetic flux density that's there to the production of electrical output.
By stimulating the existing oscillations of space energy, his radiant energy device ran for days, putting out 50 kilowatts of electricity. His public demonstrations attracted newspaper coverage and scientists from Bell Laboratories and the Department of Agriculture's Rural Electrification Movement. Although no one could find evidence of fraud, neither could anyone explain how the radiant energy device worked. During the 30s, he developed semiconductors and transistors that were far ahead of their time. Unfortunately, as all too many inventors have suffered, he refused to sell out to powerful enemies. Moray and his family were threatened, shot at, and the laboratory ransacked. Ignored by the U.S. Patent Office, Moray quietly stopped public disclosure of the device after it was destroyed by his assistant, Felix Frazier. Communist sympathizer, frustrated, Moray declined his repeated offers to take that technology.
This torch here is producing a temperature at 1200 degrees Celsius. Now try cooking an ordinary egg like that, and in a very few seconds, the results would be quite an explosion. But I'm going to leave this torch here, blowing on this egg for a couple of minutes before we crack it open. And it ought to survive the inferno because it's coated with a remarkable new plastic. What it's made of is a closely guarded secret. All the inventor will say is that 20 years' experience as a ladies' hairdresser led him to the discovery. So how is it doing? Well, it hasn't broken up at all, and you can see on the front here it's glowing red hot. But just watch this. If I turn the flame off and remember that it was producing 1200 degrees Celsius, and I take that charred bit and I put it flat in the palm of my hand, it only just feels warm. And if I then crack it open, what's more, the egg hasn't even begun to start cooking.
In Oklahoma, where oil has been king for over a century, inventor Troy Reed has been busy in his shop constructing rotating magnetic motors that he believes will soon revolutionize how we get around.
And it does work. It's 150 volts. What we're going to do, turn off all the switches, make sure there ain't nothing plugged into it. There's the plug. There's your 110 volts. Motor still running. You can operate this table plumb around. Still got energy running. Nothing tied up in the back of it. Nothing on the floor. Rotate around, still running electricity. So we're looking, hoping this time next year that you'll be able to use it in home. So that's another. And what's good about this, you're talking about electric automobiles. This right here can set it in the back of an electric automobile and generate electricity and charge batteries up in a car. Beautiful automobile. You can drive it anywhere you want to. You don't pollute the air. All the other electric automobiles that I've actually seen has been nothing but this standard transmission. This is an automatic transmission car. There's not a whole lot of what you call junk, I would call, under cars. I've seen a lot of electric cars that had a lot of stuff in it. The only thing that this has a battery to run the radio, the blower. We've got two safety switches over here that can be mounted into an enclosed system, but we did this where you could see, where people can see this car with the technology. It's a safety switch system. This is a controller box, a Curtis control box. It cuts the amperage down. So with the amperage, here's what's real good about electric automobiles. All electric automobiles that have surge technology with this in it, they create heat. They've got to have a fan to blow this Curtis controller up because it gets hot. We don't want that to get hot. We want to stay that cold, because once it stays cold, you save on all the computer chips that's in this controller. So that means you can go farther, longer, and you'll have no problems.
Turn the machine on. Denny Klein fires up his hot new invention. His machine emits a flame that feels only slightly warm to the touch. But watch what happens when he touches anything else.
Instantaneously, I can burn a hole right down through the center of that brick.
The flame instantly turns hotter than the surface of the sun. Heat so intense it takes only seconds to literally burn a hole through charcoal. 3 seconds turns a brass ball to glowing liquid metal. Tungsten lights up like a sparkler. steel, lead, and other metals slices on contact. Yet the tip of the welder stays cool to the touch.
No other gas will do this.
Denny Klein uses an alternative fuel source once thought impossible. He says people still have trouble believing him when he reveals his liquid fuel.
Water. Take water and electricity, and we break it down through our very unique electrolysis process.
Klein has just patented his process of converting H2O to HHO, producing a gas that combines the atomic power of hydrogen with the chemical stability of water.
It turns right back to water. You can see the water running off of this.
Klein originally designed his water-burning engine for cutting metal. He thought his invention would replace volatile acetylene in welding factories. And then one day, as he drove to his laboratory in Clearwater, he thought of another way to burn his HHO gas.
On a 100-mile trip, we use about 4 ounces of water.
Klein says his prototype 1994 Ford Escort can travel exclusively on water, though he currently has it rigged to run as a water and gasoline hybrid.
His numerous devices supposedly achieve super efficiency rates by recycling excess energy through closed-loop systems.
I built the world's most efficient heat pump and developed it. And these are the evaporators for that heat pump right here. They're 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. Now, the refrigerant we put in here boils at 40 degrees below zero. Therefore, anytime, day or night, outside in a rainstorm or in a windstorm or hailstorm or a snowstorm, or just out on a nice hot sunny day or in the middle of a cold night, as long as the refrigerant that's inside this panel is colder than whatever the air is out here or the phenomenon that's hitting this panel, then the heat from the air or the sun or the wind or the rain or the sleet or the snow will be transferred into the refrigerant on the other side, because it's the second law of thermodynamics. Hot goes to cold. So if this is the coldest thing outside, anything out there that touches it is going to give its heat to it. A little bit of heat goes a long way. That gas starts expanding like crazy, and as it expands, it then is drawn into the compressor, not through suction. I've got engineers and inventors that don't like to use the term suction, but through negative pressure. So as the compressor is creating this negative pressure, the gas is migrating to it. And so a compressor is a gas pump. It'll pump gas. And so the gas is being pumped by the compressor into the compressor, elevated in temperature. And even though if you touch this panel, it's ice cold to your hand, and if you touch the line going out of the panel, it's still ice cold to your hand. When it hits that compressor takes all the gas in this space, puts it in that space, elevates the pressure and the temperature. Going out of the compressor, do not touch that line whenever that thing is on, because it's 200 to 250 degrees hot. And so that's where we get the heat. All of the heat is transferred in here. We then use a compressor to take the relatively useless energy that we've got and elevate the temperature and pressure and make it very useful energy. Then that heat would be transferred later.
It's something you won't see in the world market, because the oil companies, of course, don't want this on the market. It's just a wooden frame. It's got an auto switch on it right here, an automobile switch, which I'm going to get closer. Okay, turns it off and on. I put a cover over it, a jar, to protect it. Now it's compressed. Material in this is made of, one rod is made of 73 different elements. The other side is made of 74 elements. There's one additional element, and that's why one is negative and one is positive. The one builds up electrons. The neutrinos that strike the Earth 24 hours a day, and other things striking the Earth, combination of them causes electrons to build up in one of these rods, and it depletes them in the other side, much like a solar panel works, very much like a solar panel. But a solar panel needs light 24 hours a day if you're going to use it 24 hours. Otherwise, it only works when the sun comes out. Now, this here, as you can see, very, very light, has practically no weight to it. But there's plenty of energy there. As I run this up the rod, you can see.
Let me get a little closer to that. Okay.
These are Christmas tree lights. 110 volts. So this is a 25-watt bulb. It's 110 and 25 watts. Now, let's see what happens when we put that on. Now, of course, it won't be as bright because this takes a lot of amperage, and the wattage. This here, the watts on this thing here is only about, right now, about 18 watts only. And this is 25 watts.
Now, do the rods get hot?
No, the rods don't get hot. The light bulb is just hot.
Yeah, because it's
it gets hot. Now, you need a very big battery to do that. If you want to do that with a battery. That's to show there's no power here as far as storage power. It stores a certain amount of electrons because it builds up. So we can show they're not like a solar panel. Now let's turn the switch on. So the power is now going from the bottom terminals through the switch here to the top here.
Right, okay.
Now we use these two terminals on here because sometimes at the cave site we used to use this to charge the big battery. See? So that's why we put those terminals on. Now let's black it out. See if we can still light it. See what I mean?
You all right?
Greetings, fellow nerds. Quick question. Is water, A, attracted by a magnet, B, repelled by a magnet, or C, completely non-magnetic? Most of you will answer C, and you wouldn't be wrong. After all, in everyday life, you'd notice nothing unusual about water and magnetism. But interestingly enough, the correct answer is B. Water is actually slightly repelled by a magnet. This antimagnetic property is called diamagnetism. However, the effect is extremely weak. That's why most people don't know it's there. To see it, we need to build an extremely sensitive detector. Luckily, this is brutally simple. Just get a basin of water and put into it a styrofoam block. It's going to move around a lot, but this is actually a good thing. The styrofoam floats, and because it's so light, even the smallest force will push it around. So try and build this away from drafts and moving air, and be careful that your own breathing doesn't disrupt it. The water helps to dampen any stray motion. Now get a test tube and fill it with water and push it into the center of the styrofoam. This is the water we're actually going to measure, not the water in the basin. Now steady it, and when it's still, get a strong neodymium magnet and hold it as close as possible to the tube without touching it. Oops, I hit it there. Let me steady it. Okay, let me try again. Slowly but surely, it's moving away from the magnet. It's an extremely weak effect, but it's happening. A perceptive viewer will also ask about the glass. And yes, the glass is also diamagnetic and also contributes to the repulsive effect. Now, it doesn't matter the orientation of the magnet. There's no north or south in a diamagnetic material. It will always be repelled by a magnet. Now, this video is time-lapsed. It actually moves a lot slower than this. I'll show you the actual speed at the end of this video. Moving on, I'm going to show this special material called pyrolytic carbon, sometimes called pyrolytic graphite. It's made by heating a hydrocarbon to decomposition temperature without oxygen. Pyrolytic carbon is much more diamagnetic than water, and it's pushed around quite easily. In fact, it can even support its own weight. I have here 4 strong neodymium magnets arranged with the poles facing up, but like poles on opposite corners. This creates a magnetic weak spot in the center where the pyrolytic carbon can be stably levitated. As you can see with this sheet of paper, there's nothing underneath. It doesn't matter what side it is. As said before, diamagnetic materials are always repelled by magnetic fields. Let me move the camera. As you can see, the sheet is levitating about 1 millimeter off the magnets. and a sheet of paper can easily be passed around it. Whoops. It can support a small piece of tissue. Superconductors are even stronger and levitate higher than water or pyrolytic carbon, but currently require very cool temperatures. Pyrolytic carbon, however, works at room temperature and can easily be purchased online. I've listed some sellers in the video description. So that's the amazing property of diamagnetism. Please subscribe, rate, and comment. Alright, so this is the actual speed of the diamagnetic water experiment. As you can see, it's really weak.
In this experiment, we need a magnet. So this is a magnet, not a coin. We also need a container where the inside wall is covered with aluminum foil. The foil in the center pin will be connected to a battery. Make sure the magnet is right under the center pin. Fill the container with a strong solution of ordinary salt and water. Now, connect the battery. The bubbles are hydrogen and oxygen and is a byproduct of this experiment. The real effect the experiment demonstrates is that the water rotates. As you see, the water rotates clockwise. See the description of the movie for an explanation of why this happens.
You might not think of water as being magnetic, but it is, and so are graphite, aluminum, and glass. This is a new and different category of magnetism called either para or diamagnetism, and it's different from the magnetism that you're used to. You're probably already familiar with ferromagnetism. Ferro means iron. An unmagnetized piece of iron, or nickel or cobalt, becomes a magnet in the presence of a magnetic field. The effect is strong and lasts even after the magnet is removed. Paramagnetism is a similar effect, except that it's much weaker and temporary. Aluminum is a good example of a paramagnet. And so is oxygen, which is attracted to magnets. Here, I have a few milliliters of liquid oxygen, which sticks to the magnet. I'll explain why later. Gadolinium oxide and cupric sulfate are good examples of paramagnetic substances. Cupric sulfate is a salt that can be picked up by a magnet. Diamagnetic materials are exactly the opposite of paramagnetic. They are always repulsed. They would rather die than be in a magnetic field. An important example of a diamagnetic material is graphite. This specially made pyrolytic graphite is repelled by a magnetic field. Don't be confused. This is not static electricity or eddy currents. Graphite is repelled by a magnet, always, both by the north and south end. Pyrolytic graphite is a grown crystal of flat carbon layers which maximizes the diamagnetic effect. Of course, the best diamagnets are superconductors, which at low temperatures provide exact opposite repulsion to whatever magnetic field is present when they're chilled. They are perfect diamagnets. The most famous and powerful diamagnetic is bismuth, element number 83 on the periodic table. The bismuth-powered boat sails toward the weaker magnetic fields. One way to check whether an object is diamagnetic or paramagnetic is to see how it aligns itself in a magnetic field. Diamagnetic objects like glass will rotate to avoid magnets. Here, we see that the glass is diamagnetic because it twists to get to the weaker magnetic field. But aluminum rotates into the field, typical of a paramagnet. On the periodic table, we see that aluminum has 3 valence electrons. So what does it take to understand what it means for something to be a paramagnet or a diamagnet? You have to know what the electrons are doing. Consider, for example, aluminum. We see from the periodic table that aluminum has 3 valence electrons. That's 2s and 1p. Now it's that unpaired electron that makes it a paramagnet. This unpaired electron enables it to become magnetized. And it's that unpaired electron that is free to be magnetized and attracted by the magnet. But what about a diamagnet like water? Yes, the water molecule. It has all of its electrons paired. It will not be magnetized. In fact, water is repelled by a magnetic field. The electrons come to lower energy as they are moved away from the magnet. In conclusion, when something is a paramagnet or a diamagnet, it tells you what its electrons are doing. In the case of a paramagnet, it has at least 1 unpaired electron. In the case of a diamagnet, it has mostly paired electrons.
So I'm hitting it.
Next, what I'm going to do is put my hands on the handle and start driving them. Now look at the water. Pretty amazing, huh? Let's look at this a lot closer. Look at these waves. How cool is that?
Okay. I'm going to show you something that you've never seen before. This is a Crookes radiometer. You've seen that before. Obviously, it's been around for ages. But let me show you something first, and then let me explain to you something really important that I guarantee you do not know. Now, I'm just using high capacitance, purple, i.e. blue in spectrum light, to spin up the Crookes radiometer. This is a very low intensity LED, not touching the radiometer. See it spinning up? Now, let's take a look at blue in spectrum. This is blue in spectrum, the purple was, but this is a less intense light source. Nothing. What about green or red? You'll get absolutely nothing. Nothing whatsoever. This is bright, all the same intensity. Light purple light. Starts to spin up again. Not very fast, but this is a low intensity LED, but it's very high capacitance. The red LED with same intensity will never spin it up, nor will the blue. I'm about to tell you something really important here. Let me turn all the lights on, and let me come right back. Let me tell you what's going on, okay? Something that you had no idea about. And right now, I'm going to take a dump on all the ideas that you thought that you understood about modern science. This device is so simple, you can mail order one from eBay, $5 or $6. It's basically just two things. It's not even vacuum sealed, although this one might be. On the end of this needle is a little glass vial, of which are attached little veins of metals, coated white on one side, black on the other. If I apply a real high intensity light, it'll start spinning up. This isn't that high intensity, but you can see what's going on. You're like, oh, okay, well, this is boring. Well, hold on, I'm getting to the good part, okay? We think we're so advanced with our quad-core processors. And look, I was #1 for 2 years running on Apple for answering tech support on the MacBook Air. We think we're so advanced. Look at this. This is today. This is not, yesteryear. These are all the theories about how the Crookes radiometer works. There are many, many theories. You see, this simple thing, which is more simple than a damn saltine cracker, modern science. Oh, we've got particle accelerators in France, and we've got the Hubble telescope, and we're so advanced. No, we're not. Modern science has still not come to conclusion as to how the hell this works. Don't believe me? Don't give a damn. Go research it for yourself. There are thermodynamic explanations, which, kind of seems logical that, oh, well, if you turn it on the white, you can actually stop it. But if you point it towards the black, it starts to spin up and be like, well, it's heat. Black heats up faster. and therefore that's why it starts to spin in the direction of the applied light. There have been mechanical explanations, especially these particle idiots that think, well, it's actually light beating on the black veins and, you know, pressing it like, you know, pressing against a car or something. Thermodynamic explanation, black body radiations, force explanations, pressure explanations. This device has been around for a long time, this Crookes radiometer. Science has still not figured out how this works. I, however, have, and I'm the first person in the world who has. And the reason I have is because this fat bald tattoo freak you see in front of you, you know, who is a genius, chess champion in high school and college, translate ancient Greek for fun. I literally wrote the book on magnetism, and I'm the first person to accurately tell you what light is. It's a coaxial circuit. It's not merely transverse electrical magnetic. It has a longitudinal dielectric. And Mother Nature, she's a really, really simple gal. Okay, she's not an insane hooker on crack, as quantum mechanics would have you believe. She only understands two co-principles, force and motion, and inertia and acceleration. The entire universe is resistance, capacitance, permeability, magnetism, permittivity, electricity. Okay, well, what about that? It means the explanation for this is 100% correct based upon everything that I know about magnetism, which is complete, and everything that I know about light, which is also complete. There's no such thing as a speed of light. It is a rate of induction. The maximum rate of transverse field phenomena through a medium. That medium, of course, being the ether. There's no such thing as warp space-time. Einstein was incorrect on this. There is no premise to back this up. It's dielectric acceleration. That which we call gravity is dielectric acceleration. The same thing that you saw. See, science, by the way, has no idea. There's a famous quote from Tesla that goes, if you want to understand the universe, you need to think in terms of frequency and wavelength. And of course, correct on that. And people quote Tesla on that all the time, but they have no idea what the hell Tesla is saying. He's not simply saying frequency and wavelength. What he's talking about is capacitance. He's talking about the nature of that. You actually change, given a inertia or field perturbation. When you change the wavelength, when you change the frequency, you change the capacitance, you change the power. What happens when you think you go towards the red end of the spectrum out in the sun? Well, you're going to get a sunburn, not too bad. You start heading towards the blue end of the spectrum, whereas where all the dangerous crap is, X-rays, everything else, that's when it'll kill you in a heartbeat. There's more capacitance per dielectric pulse in the longitudinal coaxial nature of light than there is towards the red end of the spectrum, okay? I'll sit here all day long with a blue end spectrum LED. Won't turn. Red, I'll sit here until I drop dead. It's not going to turn. I bring up the higher capacitance, the threshold. You know, each one of these little veins has a certain mass. I mean, this is not some serious output out of this little tiny LED. It's not much. But the veins will start to turn, only with the higher capacitance light. Now, this is a fact. You don't believe me? These are all still the current theories on how this simple device works. This device is more simple than a saltine cracker. It is perched on a needle that works as basically a low friction bearing to allow these little veins to spin with applied light. Now, building something and reproducing something, easy. Any chimp can do it. Explaining something is where wisdom and true intellect comes into play. See, anybody can observe phenomena, like the idiot Einstein. He won a Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect. By the way, this device, I'm going to tell you how it works in a second, works the exact same way the photoelectric effect works, as incorrectly explained by Einstein. Well, Einstein won a Nobel Prize. Yeah, you know what that means? That means one idiot, moron, tried to explain something, and that explanation was accepted by a lot of other people who patted him on the back and gave him a Nobel Prize for something that he didn't deserve. Correct observations, which are reproducible, does not have any bearing on the explanation for that phenomena. This is a huge error in science. Huge error in science. Academic hubris is so, where's your PhD at? Just your PhD. You're saying you know more than people have a PhD. You know what a PhD in peer-reviewed means? PhD in peer-reviewed means that you kiss a bunch of assholes of people above you, you agree with their crap, and all those people did was agree with crap before them. It is a giant circle jerk of stupidity, ignorance, and hubris. H-U-B-R-I-S. Hubris. Academic hubris is the gigantic disgusting cancer that sits inside the brains and the eyeballs of modern science. All these people do is parrot one idiot before them. And no invention, no creativity, nothing is discovered new unless you start to think outside of the box and you stop kissing the ass of the people before you that didn't know anything and people before them. The way this device works is the same way the photoelectric effect works. It was discovered that there's a certain threshold frequency of light that caused the buildup between the cathode and the anode of electrostatic buildup. Okay? Now, Einstein's explanation for that was 100% incorrect, but since I understand exactly what light is, and I understand that Mother Nature's a really simple gal. She only works in force and motion, inertia and acceleration, resistance, capacitance, permeability, and permittivity. Everything is force and motion, inertia and acceleration. The way this works, and the reason why the higher capacitance light towards the blue end of the spectrum, but a little further than the blue, towards the purple here, why this begins to spin up only. This is low emission LED here. Why it only begins to spin up with a higher capacitance and never with the red or the green or even the blue, because this is low output, is because what is actually going on is that there is an electrostatic buildup and a discharge against the medium. It is no different than a magnetic repulsion. It is a force repulsion against inertia. The reason that black vein, obviously the white light is reflecting. Doesn't matter what frequency the light is, obviously. The white light works the same thing with a flashlight. You bring it towards the white end of the vein, it'll stop. You point it towards the black end of the vein, it'll start to speed up. Okay, well, that's perfectly understood. Obviously, that's been understood now for well over 100 years regarding this simple device. The white light is obviously reflecting most of the light, so it starts to halt. Bring it towards the black end of the vein, it will start to speed up. Speed up there, point it towards the white, it'll halt. It's like applying the brakes on a car. So that's obviously understood. Reflectance. That's capacitance. The black painted vein, which is metal little veins, has higher capacitance. And when that capacitance threshold is breached, what happens is it sets up a forced discharge, like causing basically an electrical explosion. In some people's minds, they're unable to think in simple terms. I'm going to make a simple analogy. What you're doing is you're creating a force discharge, a miniature electrical explosion, if you will, obviously incredibly small, a discharge of that black vein against the point of inertia. It's no different than what you would ignorantly call magnetic repulsion. So yes, this little simplex device has been around now for ages. I was about to say eons. I mean, this device has really been around for a long time.